$8 and you get 250 points. Once you reach 1,000 points, you'll get 25% off your next transaction. Sign up today at the General Store, 12 North 25th, Fort Dodge. The Loyalty Program. It's perfect for loyal customers like you.
It's Michael Devine at AM 1400.
In the name of justice and the American way of life.
With 60 rounds of freedom.
That's right. We have 60 rounds of freedom and a pastor here with us, usually this time of, not usually this time of the week. Pastor Harold's usually here on Monday, but of course, Monday was a holiday. And we're going to talk about the importance of Dr. Martin Luther King, simply from a Christian standpoint.
Sure.
Because he changed the country and perhaps the world with Christian love.
Completely.
And we have to remember that.
I think it's so important during this time.
Yes, absolutely. There are those like, that scrawny little bug-eyed Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer who, I shouldn't be name calling. No.
Especially one sentence after talking about Martin Luther King's legacy of love.
Well, put a picture of Martin Luther King next to Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer.
Mm-hmm.
Whoa. Here's the handsome.
Yeah, King was a good-looking guy.
Apparently the FBI had recordings of him reaping the benefits of being a good-looking guy. He was under a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, Dr. King changed the world with love.
Mm-hmm.
And those two want to hammer us into submission. And really, I'll have to talk about Nancy Pelosi a little bit later on today, but some of the plans that she has, including making Washington, D.C. a state with two, no doubt, liberal senators.
Interesting, yeah.
Would be part of that power grab.
Yeah.
But I don't want to do it right now. Now that I've set it up so well.
Well, the only thing I'd say is I'd be bummed. My whole life we've had 50 states. It's such a nice, even round number.
It really is.
To go to 51 or 52, that's just, how do you put that? Where does the 51st star go on the flag?
Well, and Alaska and Hawaii petitioned to be states, and they were.
Mm-hmm.
And I suppose the District of Columbia would as well. And they'll make an argument that, like, we have more of a population than
probably
Alaska.
Or North Dakota or something like that.
Oh, North Dakota and South Dakota both, I'm
Yeah.
sure, but they're right. But the nation's capital should not be an independent state. There's too much influence enough. I mean, the federal government's in Washington, D.C. The last thing we need is a couple of U.S. senators, especially liberals, because, liberals have been captivated by relativism, moral relativism. They think that's the truth. They think, and here's Joe Biden. He has decided that there needs to be a Department of Science and Technology or something to find the truth.
Yeah.
I mean, in other words, we'll have this guy or woman sitting next to the Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State, on and on and on. And what? He's Secretary of Truth or what? He or she? I don't know.
Yeah. I would say.
I think I should have the job as going to be Secretary of Truth.
There you go. Yeah. You're the Doctor of Truth. So you might as well be the Secretary as well. I think on both sides, to be fair, I think you get. I think you get a sense of justifying what we believe and what we want to do and believing that our perspective is the right one. And I think really you do get that on both sides, especially on kind of the more strong ends on both sides. And we do have that right now.
Yeah.
In both extremes, which is why I think Dr. King was so important in the work that he did, because he spoke truth. He spoke difficult, challenging truth, called people to account, but he did not invite violence. He fought against it. He argued against it. When Stokely Carmichael came around, and who I think he changed his name to Kwame Ture. I can't remember now. Anyway, when Malcolm X and Stokely Carmichael came up and said, "Your change is too slow. We must get their attention, and if it takes violence, that's what we're going to do." Yeah.
Malcolm X especially was very frightening to white people at the time. We're going to do this by any means necessary. He's a big, tall guy. I believed him personally. I was just a little kid, but I believed him.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, he let it be known that there was going to be violence unless there was change. And Stokely Carmichael, one of his quotes that I remember was, if you put your hands on us, we're going to break your arm. You know, that doesn't sound loving.
Yeah. Now, granted, we shouldn't be, you know, the you or whomever, like we shouldn't be putting our hands on people who are engaged in protest either. And there was a lot of that was going on then too. But I think just looking back on the last 11 months with all of the BLM protests, but then now also with the Capitol protests that turned into the insurrection last week, I've now heard kind of people making these false equivalents, you know, kind of like, oh, if that had been a BLM protest, this would have happened. Or, you know, if that person who was shot by an officer had been this colored skin, that would have happened. And kind of, you know, going back and forth one after the other. And I would like to say, can't we in all of these instances say that protests turned to violence are not the answer in any of these instances? Certainly at the Capitol, but then also in some of the other cities. I mean, in Portland and in Seattle and in places this last year, it wasn't appropriate then either. And I hate that you get identified basically in one political camp or the other, depending on which type of protest you denounce.
I will say that when I was a young man, if the police approached black people, they were immediately defensive, and I don't blame them, because the cops would club them and throw them in the car if they spit on the sidewalk. You know, and the police, by the way, knew there was no consequence to them at all. You know, that's radically changed now.
Yeah,
and I think it's changed too far, where the police have no authority really, and there's a move underway to make the police officers social workers. No, you should still give them their billy clubs, you know, just in case.
Well, I mean, as I've found, even just in being the chaplain of the police department now in recent months, I mean, things can happen in a matter of seconds. And it doesn't take very long to go from being on patrol to being in a pretty intense situation.
That's I forgot that you're the chaplain of the police department out here in town. Have you been in tense situations? You sat in the car and covered up with a blanket, didn't you?
Yeah, I mean,
you didn't leap out of the car and mix it up with the criminals.
Yeah, nothing like that. I mean, relatively speaking, I've been in things that to me have been pretty intense, but I think are still pretty tame on the scale of experience that officers have been through. But I'm just beginning to kind of see a little bit of what their day-to-day work is like, and the challenges that they deal with day in and day out. So I totally get that. Now, I think every one of us has biases, and I think the real challenge then is that in those tense moments, our default assumptions about life, about people, all of that stuff kind of comes up, which is why training is so important, right?
Sure.
I mean, you've got to have all of that training so that in those moments of crisis, you don't have time to think. It's just automatic. And that's, I think, where the challenge can be, is if we have unchallenged assumptions about people or people groups, those things come out in those moments of crisis. And that's not any one person. I mean, it's that way for all of us. It's just that for many of us, we don't find ourselves in those kinds of crisis moments very often where those default assumptions really come out. So, you know, I think there is ongoing work to be done in all of us in still trying to find common ground with people who are different from us. And so I would like to be able to have conversations with people who I don't always agree with, or who don't always agree with me, and to do so in a way that, you know, we can learn from one another and come together anyway. And I just find that that's increasingly difficult to do. Especially because of our opinions about the truth. And, you know, I've got the truth and you don't. And so, you know, any opportunity you have to promote your idea, you know, you're promoting non-truth because you don't believe what I do.
Yeah.
And we're just in trouble if that's where we are.
Well, yeah. I mean, ask the Mormons. Of course, I mean, ask any group through history, including Christians. I mean, Daniel and Lyons and our country was founded by Christians who found the situation in their home country intolerable. I just got a text, by the way, from one of my friends who tells me that Christianity or Christians are not obsolete, merely impotent. So I don't know if that was something that he was trying to cheer me up with by telling me I'm not obsolete, just merely impotent. It's not doing it.
Yeah. I'm not sure if it's
not
ever
working for me.
I'm not sure if it's ever good news to hear that you're just impotent.
Impotent. Yeah. Could you clarify that? I mean, well, maybe I don't want you to clarify it. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, certainly, I don't think Christians are obsolete at all, but I do think the world around us is changing, and people's approaches to information are changing. And so we cannot just assume that people care about our opinion because of our position. I can't assume that as a pastor. And I think the church can't necessarily assume that, which goes back to what Dr. King stood for, that people are going to look first and foremost at our actions and how are we loving our neighbors. And if we don't have that really down pat, then people really are not going to care what we have to say.
Yeah, that's true. I got another text here from Pastor Austin Hill, surprisingly.
Oh, yeah. That was during the break. I forwarded you the link to an article about conspiracy theories and in the church, and kind of the likelihood of people within the church to kind of believe conspiracy theories, which I think gets back to what we were talking about a little bit before the break with this idea of the truth and how do we know what to trust, and our own proclivity to deceive ourselves. And so I think, even throughout Scripture, there are instances of, like in Proverbs, for example, that talk about wisdom and that following God is often to be considered foolishness to others. Or in the New Testament, I think it's Paul who calls it foolishness to the Greeks. And so because of that, we often have this this resistance to what seems to be common knowledge. Just because everyone else thinks that's true, that's all the more reason in the church to challenge that assumption, which is not always the case.
Yeah.
But I think in terms of like with science and with discussions about creation versus evolution, and I was the kid. I'll fully admit this. When I was in high school, for example, in my I went to a public school in California, 2,000 students. And I remember as a senior in high school, for example, we had to lead a class discussion on a topic, any topic we wanted to talk about.
Really?
And I chose mine. I chose creation versus evolution. And so I led my English class in 12th grade through a conversation about should we believe in a literal 6-day creation or naturalistic evolution. And so maybe, that was an indication that I was one day going to be a pastor, if that's the kind of
That's
stuff.
Probably an indication, yeah.
That I was interested in talking about.
George Orwell, but you go ahead.
Yeah. We read, what was it? Brave New World by Aldous Huxley that year too. But I saw it as part of my Christian duty to present kind of this alternative vision of truth and reality, because the biology class that was talking about evolution, was teaching non-truth, I thought. And it's only as I've gotten older and it just kind of reflected more on science and on faith that I've only kind of begun to come to terms with the fact that faith and science do not have to be in conflict with one another. And just because an opinion is held by many people, that does not mean it's automatically anti-Christian.
Well, you'd have been way out of step with my sophomore science teacher, I'll tell you. He got up in class, seriously, way back in the 60s, and he said, I'm supposed to teach both sides of the evolutionary theory. So he would give then the evolutionary theory. And when he was finished, he said, now, if you want to believe that there's somebody sitting up on a throne made of clouds and throwing lightning bolts at you, you go right ahead, but I'm not going to, and this is why. So I said, okay. What do you think of the creation story, Adam and Eve? I've heard it described as a parable by pastors and ministers. What do you think of the creation story, the Adam and Eve story?
Yeah, I think probably, if you had to pin me against a wall, that I would agree with that. That I think it is. I don't know about a parable, but I think it's a helpful story of the origin of humanity that helps us understand human nature and God's nature. But in terms of there being a historical man and woman as the first human beings, I think the most I could probably say would be that there would be some time where we evolved to human consciousness, and that could be Adam and Eve. Now I could die and go to heaven and find out that it happened literally in 6 days, exactly as it was described, and that'd be okay too, obviously. But I think for me, looking at Genesis 1 and at Genesis 2, it seems pretty clear that these are two different stories of creation that are put together back to back right there in Scripture. And so we're confronted with this fact that even if you just read chronologically Genesis from chapter 1, 2, 3, and on, there's different stories that are inserted in there telling different kinds of things about God and about people.
Certainly. George Carlin had a great comedy piece way back in the early 70s about the creation story, and actually the story of Cain and Abel.
Mm-hmm.
And it struck a chord with the audience, and I was in the audience. He said, Cain slew Abel and went and dwelt in the land of Nod. And Cain knew his wife. And then he'd pause dramatically and say, where did she come from?
Exactly, right?
Now, who slipped her in there?
Yeah. Yeah. Now, this is what's so interesting, even to myself. 16-year-old me would have heard what I just said on the air and said, then you're not truly a Christian.
Okay.
Because you don't completely believe every word literally of the Bible, or that it's literally true in that sense. And if you can't place your trust in that, then how do you even know that Jesus rose from the dead, or that Jesus is who he said he was? And so it's fascinating looking even just in my own life how my ideas have changed. Now, granted, that was 20 years ago, 21 years ago now that I thought those things. Obviously, we change over time.
Yeah, I was going to say, that sounds a little fanatical.
Yeah.
I always think that Christians do, and of course you were just a kid.
Yeah.
Christians do themselves no good by blindly defending stories like that. And I would hate to think of that Christians would one day lose faith in reason and rationality, and that they would behold the world as it is and see that and know that God is just offering us the word and say, now do the best you can.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, now I think
I won't be there to part the Red Sea every day.
Yeah. But I think where we automatically go with that then is, well, then do you just pick and choose what you want to believe? And if
you're a Christian, yeah.
Yeah. And if you just pick and choose what parts of the Bible you want to believe, well, then isn't truth relative? And then you just go right down that slippery slope.
Right down that. No, truth isn't relevant. The wisdom of Christ and the knowledge in the Bible is the truth.
Certainly, yeah.
There may be some dramatic stories like the Adam and Eve story, or Jonah being swallowed by a whale.
Yeah.
I don't know if that happened, but
well, and I think that goes back to Jesus ultimately, as Christians, is our interpretive lens for the Bible. We look at the life and ministry of Jesus as a way of helping us understand the rest of Scripture. And then secondly, we also consider what was the intended use or the purpose of these parts of Scripture. And there's different genres in Scripture. It's not all written to the same audience. It's not all written necessarily for the same purpose. And so I think we are bringing our 21st century or 20th century scientific needs into the Genesis text when we say, well, did it literally happen in 6 physical days? And how did all of that happen scientifically? I don't think the author of Genesis was really all that concerned with answering those questions.
No, absolutely not. And I have always responded as well. There's not a book ever going to be big enough to explain everything.
Yeah, exactly.
There's just not going to be a book like that, So I will trust the truth of God because I've seen the power of God work in my life. Mm-hmm. When I have called, and there's been I'm not talking about something silly like I wish I could win the lottery or anything like that. Would you please give me $1 billion cash or nothing like that? But just show me the way.
Yeah.
Just show me the way. And if I do that humbly, which is difficult for me, I get shown the way. And it's not a path that I would have picked, by the way, but it's the way.
And I think often that discernment happens in Christian community. So alongside others, as we seek God together.
All right, Pastor Austin Hill has been our guest. Thank you, sir.
My pleasure.
It's 3:00. The news is next. Jesse Green, our new senator, will be our next guest.
If you're into cars or just want to learn a thing or two, tune in every Saturday afternoon from 2 till 4 for the End of the Hood Car Show on AM 1400 KVFD, Fort Dodge.
Parting words from